What you're seeking is a blessing from God.
You must expect a miracle.
You have the power of choice.
Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ.
Welcome to Life Today Live. Good to be here on this Monday with you guys. And we're gonna kick off the week talking about sort of some current issues. You know, there's this interesting thing, and I may even ask my guest about it, but we hear, you know, Jesus stayed out of politics. And I mean, yeah, you can make that argument because it wasn't like he was running for office. I mean, granted, Jesus didn't get married. He didn't have kids. So, I mean, how far do you want to take that, right? I think the question is not, you know, what would Jesus do, but what would Jesus have me do? Because we're not stuck in the first century there. But if you go look at what Jesus did and what he said, he went right to the root of issues. And those root issues are what we apply in our everyday lives, whether it's at work, in our family, and in our politics. So I think saying that Jesus didn't address politics is a little bit wrong, you know, in that he addressed things that directly affect politics and the way we govern, the way we deal with each other. So I think it's a question of application, and I'm suspecting today's guest will agree as well because he has written some books dealing with this. In fact, I'll show you. This one is called Unquestioned Answers, and I like this one. He says cliches are making your faith shallow, and he deals with such sort of popular cliches these days as Jesus was a social justice warrior, which, yeah, we can get into that. He's also got a book, an ebook out that you can get at summit.org, and it has the very interesting title of 20 Things to Say and Do to Fight the Cancel Culture. Today's guest is the president of Summit Ministries, and he also hosts the Dr. Jeff podcast show. Dr. Jeff Myers is with me. Great to have you here on Life Today Live.
Hey, Randy, I'm glad to be with you. These are fun topics. Controversial, but really important.
Okay, so now, yes, controversial. I think we get that. Why do you feel like you need to deal with these? Because again, the criticism of a lot of ministries and ministers is you know, stay out of politics. Jesus didn't talk about it, but yet you feel like we should.
A lot of people do have that criticism. At Summit Ministries, you know, we are focused on preparing the rising generation to embrace God's truth and to champion a biblical worldview. And Randy, you have some of our resources there. So, you know, we tackle 10 different areas: theology, philosophy, ethics, biology, psychology, sociology, politics, law, economics, and history. And people usually agree with us till we get down to the politics part. And then they say, you are just being political hacks if you address those topics. People get nervous if you talk too much about politics when you're involved in Christian ministry. So here's the distinction I make. We are political because of biblical worldview speaks to everything, including politics, but we are not partisan. We don't recommend certain candidates. We don't get involved in that aspect of the elections. We just trust that if you help people get a fully equipped, robust biblical worldview, that they'll be able to make better decisions in the political realm. And it turns out that is what happens.
I'm curious, we don't endorse political candidates thing, is that because out of conviction or out of just trying to stay above the personality because people fail, or is it a 501c3 thing?
I'm sure we would run into trouble with the Internal Revenue Service if we got involved in that, but that's not our main concern. Our founder of Summit Ministries, Dr. David Noble, was regularly asked to put his weight behind different candidates. And his advice to me coming into the ministry 10 years ago was, I never did it, Tiger, and I recommend that you don't do it either. And so it's part of our heritage that we are involved in giving people really good, solid information. If you understand a biblical worldview, it really will clarify for you which candidates at different levels have more of a focus on reality and logic and reason, and what helps bring people up and give them a sense of responsibility rather than turning that responsibility over to the government. Issues on life, marriage, all of those things become clear when you understand Scripture and when you understand how throughout the last 2,000 years, wise people have interpreted Scripture and applied it to society.
Yeah, and I think that's smart. And the other thing is that it forces people to actually think for themselves instead of just being told, vote for this person,
Yeah, I get that. Yeah. I want to be told, there are people running for school board and city council and things like that. And I just think, just somebody tell me who I should vote for.
Yeah.
So I get that, but we have to be thinking people.
Yes.
Scripture says, God says, come, let us debate this out. Let's reason together. 1 Peter 3:15 says, always be ready to give an answer for the hope that you have. Mm-hmm. There's never really an excuse. Jesus said we're to love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. So thinking as strong people is really a big part of the Christian life.
Yeah, and when you talk about local elections, it forces you to engage, which is really, I think, what we're supposed to do, but we're lazy. So,
it's hard, right? There's so much that you have to do. You come home from work, you pick up the kids from school, you got to fix dinner, you got all these things, and you're supposed to somehow be a citizen involved, going to meetings and so forth. I get it. It's really hard, but that's not an excuse. That's an explanation, but it's not an excuse.
Yeah, I will admit, with no pride whatsoever, that there are many times I've skipped over candidates, and especially issues like things that are going on, not just bond issues, but like changes. And I'm like, I don't know. This proposition, I have no idea. And so anyway, we're not going to talk about that the whole time. But your book, your ebook that you put out recently on cancel culture. And I've gotten to where I hate that phrase because it's so overused. I mean, somebody criticized me on social media. It's cancel culture out to get me. Or, Target doesn't carry my product. It's cancel culture out to get. It just wears me out. But what is it really?
Yeah, the term cancel culture is very much overused in the same way that people overuse the term terrorism, right? You might have a terrorist nation who they will say, well, we're fighting the war on terror. Well, you are the terrorist, right? But cancel culture ends up being one of those terms that is so often misused that people misunderstand what it's really about. Randy, where it started is in the legitimate realization that in a free market economy, if there's a corporation that's doing something you disagree with, you can spend your money elsewhere. So you would just cancel them. What it quickly became to mean is that you would use this as a tool to bully other people online. And that's where it started becoming dangerous. And it is a thing. Ryan Lizza from Politico reviewed a poll and found that 40% of Americans say they have engaged in cancel culture. 10% say they regularly do it. Most of the people doing it are 18 to 34-year-old Democrats. But a third of Republicans say they have engaged in the cancel culture as well. And what that means is they've used their online platform to try to shut down the debate rather than to facilitate it. And that's the problem. We don't need more indignant self-righteousness. We need more vibrant, even sometimes difficult dialogue.
So would it be the difference between Neil Young saying, look, I don't want my music on Spotify because I don't agree with everything that they're doing, versus if you don't pull Joe Rogan off Spotify, you got to pull my music off Spotify? Is that sort of maybe illustrate the difference?
Well, imagine that it was a person who was having to make that decision rather than a large faceless company. Spotify, is big. But so that's completely legitimate. If Neil Young doesn't want that, $1.37 a month.
You're right. All right.
Or whatever. See, but part of the issue with Neil Young and Spotify is it's really unclear whether he's making any kind of a financial sacrifice or whether this is just moralistic posturing, right? But imagine that it was a person instead of Spotify, and you said, not only do I disagree with you, but I'm going to try to hurt you. Mm-hmm. I'm going to try to get you fired from your job. I'm going to try to ruin your reputation. That's where cancel culture becomes dangerous.
So as Christians, what's the right approach, both to this kind of culture and also to, Disney? When Disney started doing stuff, that I was like, you got to be kidding me, you know? I was like, okay, what other DVDs can I buy for my kids back in the day, right? So I made the choice, but I wasn't out to destroy them. How do we properly deal with real issues?
Again, when you look at a company like Disney and you say, I'm choosing to spend my money someplace else, and I want to let you know that,
Mm-hmm.
that's not what cancel culture is in its dangerous phase that we're dealing with these days. What we're dealing with these days is if let's say there was somebody at Disney who was a vice president and you said, I'm going to dox you, I'm going to post your home address and tell people to come by and throw stuff at your house. Mm-hmm. I am going to try to get you fired from your job. Yeah. I'm going to post lies about you to try to destroy your reputation and hurt your family. That's really more of what's going on. It's this culture of angry divisiveness. So what do you do about it? I think at Summit Ministries, we teach our students that most people go along a one-dimensional line from aggression to avoidance. Aggression is, I'm going to destroy you, mic drop moment, I'm going to shame you. Avoidance is, well, everybody has their own beliefs. You have your truth, I have my truth. We'll just have to agree to disagree. Most people just go back and forth on that line. We tell students at Summit, turn it into a triangle. Imagine at the top is the word advocate. That we're going to advocate for two things. We're going to advocate for the truth, and we're also going to advocate for the other person. Because repentance and reconciliation is the goal, not revenge. Randy, back when I was a college professor, I would occasionally have a student who would plagiarize or cheat, and they would be caught. And when they were caught, how I respond to that makes a great deal of difference. Do I try to explain to the student what they did wrong, get them to see the error of their ways, show them how to change it and so forth? Or do I try to get the person kicked out of school and then broadcast to the entire college that this person is a cheat? The last option should be off the table. Reconciliation is the goal, not revenge.
The idea of redemption, of forgiveness, of correction, those sound very biblical.
Yeah. There was somebody in history who taught about that.
Yeah, well, let's talk about him, because you know when I mentioned the book Unanswered Questions, especially the sort of the language, and you deal with a lot of students, and I know sometimes between generations, language has a slightly different meaning, different connotation. What was Jesus a social justice warrior? Because I can argue both sides of that one, I think.
Yeah. We're kind of in a fascinating period. When I was growing up, a lot of people would say Jesus didn't care about politics and neither should we. Mm-hmm. It's changed a little bit. Now it is Jesus very much cared about politics and he would be a leftist or he would be a conservative, right? So it's kind of it's the progressive versus the conservative thing going on in the church right now. And everybody who's watching or listening to this right now is probably going, yep, I've had that conversation, maybe with a family member or a friend or around Thanksgiving dinner. So the question came up when I was writing this book on Unquestioned Answers. And by the way, the title is intentionally confusing because a lot of students come to our Summit Ministries 2-week programs with unanswered questions, but a lot of them come with unquestioned answers, things that they've always believed that they've never really thought through. Mm-hmm. And the idea that Jesus is a social justice warrior is one of those. For the young adults we work with, they're like, yeah, that's obvious. Jesus was a social justice warrior. His primary concern was lifting up the poor. Well, then we go back and explain to them what social justice actually means. I came out of the academic world. Social justice does not mean being nice. Social justice means redistributing wealth and other resources of value so that there is an equality of outcome, so that no one person has anything more than anyone else. Try to imagine a pie. And if one person's getting a big slice of pie, and every kid can remember when their sibling got a bigger slice than they did and how that felt, right? So we should make everything equal. Everybody should have an equally small piece of pie. Biblical worldview is one of abundance, Randy, and you guys teach about this all of the time, that in a biblical worldview, it's not about dividing up the pie into smaller and smaller and more even pieces. It's about making more pies. Right. right? If we promote freedom, if we give people a sense of responsibility, if we show them how they can start businesses and increase their own level of income and all of those kinds of things, you can do that financially. And it turns out that that's actually what happens. The number one thing you can do to create social justice is to help people start businesses.
Yeah.
Half of the businesses in America that have been started in the last 5 or 6 years were started by people who are of a minority group. And African Americans who have started businesses have 12 times more wealth on average than those who do not. And those statistics come from the United States Senate Committee on Small Business. So they've really studied this very carefully. So, if the goal is to give people the equality of opportunity and to encourage them and help them succeed on their own, then you're not talking about what scholars talk about when they talk about social justice.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't think most people have that definition in mind. And I'm curious, where does that come from? You mentioned the academic world.
Yeah, in the academic world. So in the field of sociology, and you don't even have to read a sociology textbook to see this. You can just look at the Oxford University dictionary definition of social justice, and you'll see that it refers to the redistribution of resources. Yeah. And they mean primarily wealth and opportunity. But other resources are on the table as well. I spent a lot of time with university professors and on university campuses. And they actually believe that, for example, if you have tickets to a football game and a poor person doesn't, that you should have to give up your tickets. I mean, it's literally the equality in every way. If you're really clever at reading books, then you have to stop. If math is too hard for some people, then we have to stop the math program for everybody, right? That's the way it goes. Once you start down that path toward equality of outcome, then you literally have to redistribute everything so that nobody's head sticks up any higher than anybody else's.
Yeah, I don't think most people actually think that's what it means, but basically that's straight up sort of Marxist philosophy. I mean, and that's no question, very much not what our nation was founded on or built upon. Interesting. So. The Bible doesn't. Let me just make this key point, because we use the term social justice thinking I want to be kinder to people who are underprivileged, right? But when scholars use the term, they want you to think that's what you're doing, but they want to accomplish what they're doing, which is the implementation of a Marxist agenda. So people are being used and manipulated. Oh yeah, I was going to say that sounds very underhanded and dishonest and very manipulative. It is. Okay, well, yeah, we're clear on that then. So now, you said something that I really want to point out, because I don't know if this is something I was aware of, but when someone stated it plainly, it changed the way I saw a lot of things, especially when it comes to economics and opportunity. And that is the idea. If you ask a 20-something, is wealth infinite or finite? It's that pie you're talking about. It starts a dialogue, I think, that can be healthy because you find out where they're at. But if we look at God created. And if we're honest, everything is created from the earth, which God created. And I mean, even, the silicone chips, I mean, they're made from minerals out of the earth. I mean, all the technology we're using, it's made from dirt in a sense, So the question, I think, is how do we create the wealth that you're talking about, and then it grows? Because I don't think that's the mindset of the average person out there. I agree with you, and you've hit on something that I love to talk about. So you'll have to cut me off if I just keep going too long on this. What we have today is a battle between two worldviews, a secular worldview that is materialistic. And that by materialistic, I don't mean that they like having lots of bling. What I mean is they believe that only the material world exists or is relevant. And then you have a Christian worldview that says, yes, there is a material world, but there's also an immaterial world. There's a world of logic, that God is immaterial, and that certain values are immaterial. Justice
That's not a thing that somebody dug up in Egypt and we've studied. Justice is a concept. It's an immaterial idea. Mm-hmm. So money is material. The number of trees, that's material. You don't get, we can't put more gold in the ground. But the immaterial wealth and ideas and inspiration and innovation and all of those things, they are limitless, right? So years ago, and you probably remember this, I bought the Microsoft Windows program for my computer. And in those days, I don't know if you remember this, you buy it in a box. And there was a little CD-ROM in there and a little booklet describing how to use it, okay? The total material value of that box couldn't have been more than $1.50. Yeah. 75 cents to produce the CD and 75 cents to produce the book and the package. Yet I paid $200 for it. Why? Because it's not the material that's in there, it's the ideas, it's the innovation, it's the inspiration that was put into the program, the mental stuff, mind, not minds. See, that was the difference. And because of all of that mental stuff, I was happy to pay $200 for the program because I knew it would make my computer work a whole lot better for me so that I could achieve my goals. That's a big difference. In a materialist mindset, which is Marxism, secularism, and so forth, there is only so much to go around. From a biblical worldview, no, as long as you're thinking and dreaming, it's limitless.
See, and I think that's fabulous news. And I love how it's biblically rooted, but materially applied, because I think people can see it. It seems to me that when you talk about minorities in our country, especially African Americans who have not been treated right throughout our history, I totally acknowledge that. It seems like not telling them this is another disservice that a lot of people in power are doing by peddling this social justice Marxist kind of idea, this idea of finite wealth, and you just got to go take it from someone else if you're ever going to get it, as opposed to what is, I'm not afraid to say it, what has God put into you that can allow you to innovate and create, which will create wealth, which will level out a lot of the disparities between the classes financially. How do we as Christians shout this message to people that need to hear it most when they seem to be so in the tank to the leftists out there right now?
Yeah. I think, of course, this is what we're focused on at Summit Ministries. You've got to train people. You've got to put them in touch with thought leaders who are really good at talking about this and helping answer questions. At Summit Ministries, there are 56 hours of instruction in 2 weeks on a biblical worldview. But we also have question and answer times, open forums. Our instructors, who are the brilliant thought leaders, best-selling authors, are sitting down at lunch with students to answer their questions. You've got to have that kind of training and interaction. But what's most important about that interaction is the mentoring aspect of it. So, I tell my students at Summit Ministries, everybody should start a business. Everybody should start a business. Every single person should have a business. Why? Because in business, you have to serve in order to succeed. And you never learn to serve quite as well as when you have to serve in order to survive. Put yourself in that position. And then we have speakers come in to say, here's how to start a business. Have entrepreneurs, here's how I did it. Some of them run large companies, some of them run small companies, but they all started small. They all created opportunities for themselves. So when young adults feel like, oh, okay, this opens up a whole new world for me. I don't have to sit around and wait for handouts. I can create my own opportunities. And it's biblical to do that because I have a calling on my life. I have the ability to do it. God has given me ideas. God has inspired me. I can innovate. I can think. And when students I'll just give you a quick example. I had one student come up and say, I get all of this idea about wealth being, theoretically unlimited, but, I walk dogs for a living and I can walk a dog and I get paid $10 an hour. And all of a sudden she looked at me and said, wait a second, who says that I can only walk one dog at a time? I could walk 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 dogs. I could hire my friends to walk dogs. And I said, now you've got it. Yep. You've moved from a finite resource, which is your time, to an infinite resource, which is your ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I love it, and I think this is the way out for a lot of people, and they may not even realize it. I want to show people your website, summit.org. You talk about your classes, your students, and this is the website you guys can go to, equipping and supporting. You can see that's what they're doing right there, and it's with a biblical worldview, but it has very much, real world application as biblical worldview as it should.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to add to that, by the way, that people need to know about the school before I ask you one more question, a little bit unrelated?
Yeah, so I do. I want to make a specific pitch right now, Randy, because there are people who are watching or listening, parents or grandparents who say, I want my child to have that kind of an experience. Well, then I want them to come study with my colleagues and me for 2 weeks this coming summer, either in Manitou Springs, Colorado, or in our location, beautiful Lookout Mountain, Georgia, on the campus of Covenant College. During those 2 weeks, the students will have great community, solid mentoring and small groups, one-on-one mentoring, time to learn and grow and get all of their questions answered from a biblical worldview. So it's a really, really significant investment, especially for young adults who are on their way to a college or university.
I think that's a fabulous idea. Summit.org. Great. Okay, I have one more question, and this comes out of your book, Unquestioned Answers. And I think it's important because as Christians, we hear this a lot. And there's a scripture that we quote to back it up. And that is, I'm not to judge. I'm not to judge. Should we judge as Christians? And what should we judge, if so?
Yeah. Well, as you can tell from our discussion so far, a lot of it comes down to how we define our terms. When people think of judgment, what they usually think of as is being mean to someone who I consider myself to be superior to. That's judgment. So we don't want to be judged. We don't want to feel judged. And hopefully in our better days, we don't want to be the person who's being mean. Okay, that's what people usually think about. But to make a judgment is to make a determination about what corresponds to reality. So if I were to say at sea level, water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, I've made a judgment. And it wouldn't be an appropriate thing for somebody to say, well, maybe that's true for you and your culture, but that's not how I was raised, or that's not how I see it, right? No, it is. It's a judgment based on reality. You say, well, I think that math is racist. And so, well, it's still a 3,500 mile journey from New York to London. And even if you believe that it's shorter, you still should pack enough fuel to make 3,500 miles, right? It doesn't matter how you feel about it. Facts don't care about your feelings. Now, so when do you move from making good judgments, which we all do all of the time? We make good judgments about, hey, that car is kind of flying on the on-ramp pretty fast. I better, move over a lane, which is a good judgment, versus being judgmental, as in this person is suffering and they're suffering for reasons that they caused themselves. So I don't feel sorry for them and have no obligation to them. Let's see, that's the difference.
So when we take Jesus, judge not lest ye be judged, to use the old King James, is it that we should judge according to truth and not according to some other measure?
We should judge according to truth, and we should judge ourselves by the same standard that we judge other people.
Yeah.
The biggest problem people have today with the church is hypocrisy. The same, and we know all the stories, right? I mean, you've seen all of these people, the person who stands in the pulpit and says drinking is wrong, and then you find out that they're downing a bottle of NyQuil every night or whatever. You think there's hypocrisy there.
Yeah.
If you can't live up to the standard, then why are you standing up and thundering about it in the pulpit?
Yeah.
I think it's really a call to vulnerability, Randy. And that's how we teach at Summit Ministries. I'm very open with our students about my story, my history, things that I have as regrets of things that I did when I was younger. And that vulnerability opens up people to consider how they might better conform to God's standard, as opposed to feeling defensive that they aren't measuring up in the way someone else is.
Yep. Okay, so if you guys are listening out there and you're wondering, is that really the right application? Literally, when it says don't judge lest you be judged, Jesus is talking about the Pharisees. He said, don't judge as the Pharisees do, but judge with righteous judgment, which is what Dr. Myers is talking about, because the Pharisees would judge in a very hypocritical way and not according to God's truth. So I love that you said that. I mean, that's so spot on. All right. I know I need to let you go. I could ask you all sorts of questions because this is a very broad thing, and I wanted to ask the judgment question because it brings back around the idea of a biblical worldview and how we should rightly judge things in society and not just cop out and say, okay, maybe for you men can be pregnant, but for me they can't. No, it's actually men cannot be pregnant. There is some solid truth, and when we get back to that, I think we can actually get back some common sense in culture. Is there anything else you want to add or talk about? I did mention the Dr. Jeff podcast. Maybe you should tell us a little bit about that so people can kind of go to school with you on beyond this interview.
Yeah, I would love that. And if your viewers say, hey, Randy, you're on the right track having this guy on, I'd be happy to come back. If they say that was really boring, don't ever do that again, then we'll just stay friends and I have to come back on. But if you kind of like the things we've dug into on the show, the Dr. Jeff Show podcast is available everywhere you get your podcasts, including Liftable, Edify, Spotify, Amazon, all of the different places. And on the show, I interview major thought leaders to show that worldview changes everything. So we're dealing with really controversial issues that are timely and trying to bring on people who are expert. Some of them are not believers, but they just have really wise advice on different aspects of the economy or whatever it happens to be. So that's the Dr. Jeff Show podcast.
Yeah, and I would recommend it. This is the kind of thought that needs to happen. And if you're older like me, this is the kind of thought we need to impart to our kids and grandkids, So this is good. Dr. Jeff Myers, I appreciate your time, appreciate your insight, and sharing a little bit of that with our audience today. Thank you.
It's a lot of fun. Great conversation. Thanks, Randy.
All right. You guys want to get a little more. You got the podcast, summit.org, and then you've got this book as well, Unquestioned Answers, as well as the one on summit.org on cancel culture. So come on, people. Let's get in the game. We're called to make a difference, and we can do it. So starts here, and there's more great interviews this week on Live Today Live. So come on back. We'll see you again next time right here.
Where are you going to spend eternity? Jesus Christ says there's only one way to heaven. I ain't the way.